I would love to cut my teeth on the pre-world that Ghost came from. I would love to play the world that I never got to play and to really sink my teeth in the juicy tids and the bits included of all of that that the world never got to really. We don't even know who Ghost is. We only really know from Tasha, the kids, Tommy, Angela, but we don't really know this kid. And everybody else's spinoffs is about them being known. How ironic. So I would love to sink my teeth into that because as an actor, Joe, I don't feel like I did the full turn of the guy until I go back a bit, if that's what the game is going to be.
Now over 5 years, coming up to 6, that's how long since Ghost was killed off in Power. But even though Ghost has been gone for over 5 years, there's still so much mystery when it comes to his backstory. And this is a conversation that he had with Fat Joe a very long time ago. It's something I never really went into at the time, but now it kind of actually got me thinking. Did we really know who Ghost was? Did we really know the man behind the Tom Ford suits? Did we really know the person before he opened Club Truth? What he was like? Some of the things that he had to do?
I would love to cut my teeth on the pre-world that Ghost came from.
Now, this is a character who I do think is dead, but a character I think is still missing a lot of pieces to his puzzle before we get his full picture. Let's not forget, he still lives on in so many different ways, whether it be through a mention or two across different shows. Daniel Warren coming to remind Tariq Ghost was always 3 moves ahead. Tasha giving Tariq a reminder Ghost may have made a few mistakes, but he certainly wasn't stupid. To Tommy reminding Tariq Ghost living a double life was his downfall. Or just living through characters like Tommy and Tariq. The legacy of Ghost has and always will be felt in the Power universe, in some shape or form in the present day timeline shows. Ironically, that's also what I think the overall arching theme will be for Power Legacy, when they eventually do bring Tommy and Tariq together. We're probably going to learn even more about who Ghost was in that show as well as Origins. But I still feel there's so much more to learn about who Ghost was as a person, from more than just Legacy and Origins, from multiple angles, situations, stories, family ties, and also perspectives. And that's the topic of discussion in today's breakdown. This video kind of also branches off the last one where we spoke about the blue pill and the red pill, where it made me actually kind of question, did we really know who Ghost was? It's also kind of a warm-up to a much bigger James St. Patrick character breakdown I've got coming in the next coming weeks. I've been working on it for a very long time now, and hopefully I'll have it ready in the next few weeks. But, as always, we're going to be running through a few different perspectives, and also Omari Hardwick's comments from a while ago. Can they eventually strike a deal with Omari Hardwick to return and play some kind of part to tell a story, even if it's just a short story in the form of a Power movie, pre-Power Season 1, Episode 1, which I do think depends a lot on when they do actually finish Power Origins. But first, let's take a look at the topic of viewing Ghost from different perspectives.
The cops started knowing our faces. Every time they seen us, they used to hop out, run down on us. See, he ain't try to outrun the cops. He just figured as long as he could outrun me and Tommy, the cops would settle for us. Always think about himself.
Now, when we look at the quotes from Omari Hardwick when he spoke to Fat Joe, he mentioned that we didn't know who Ghost really was. We knew him from Tasha's angle, Tariq, Angela, Tommy's, and also Kanan's. We were given all of these different perspectives. From Kanan's perspective, he'd argue that Ghost was fake, a backstabber, and selfish. He said Ghost used to believe that if he outran Tommy and Kanan, the cops would just settle for them. Remember, back in Power, Angela did a background check on Ghost and his record came back squeaky clean, not like Tommy's or Kanan's. But Kanan's version of what Ghost was like when he was a kid is only from his perspective. Just like he told the story of Breeze's death, he made no mention of Tommy. But we all know from episode 107, it was both Tommy and Ghost who rolled up on Breeze. What Kanan couldn't tell Tariq was that he gave Breeze one last chance.
What Kanan didn't know, what Kanan couldn't tell you, is that I gave Breeze one more chance. I asked him to change his mind. He didn't.
So Omari Hardwick's mentioned that we didn't know the character before Club Truth. We didn't know much about his life prior. And it is actually kind of crazy because when we think about what Omari said, it's actually kind of true. Even though we saw this character for 6 seasons of Power, can we honestly all sit here and say we knew who Ghost was? I personally don't think we can. We definitely know parts of who he was, but even at times there were a lot of characters in Power who were intrigued by Ghost, his story, and even they constantly asked the question.
James St. Patrick, nice to finally meet you.
You're James St. Patrick. You know, I tried to run a background check on you, and no one in the nightlife world seems to know who you are.
But who is James St. Patrick?
That is the question.
Precisely.
What you see is what you get.
I'm as real as they come.
This is why there's still so much to learn about who he was from multiple different perspectives and characters. That's number one. Learning about who Ghost was from other angles and perspectives. That includes a younger version of Ghost in Power Origins, but also from the older Tommy's perspective. I posed a question after Ghost Season 4 came to an end. I asked the question, did Tariq really earn the name of Ghost? I personally don't think he's done enough, even though he did in essence, quote unquote, become the biggest goddamn drug dealer in New York. Some of you may think he has, but in that particular breakdown I mentioned, the only person who can actually give him the name Ghost is Tommy Egan. Tommy's the only person who was really by Ghost's side throughout the good times, the bad times, as they built their organization, the missions that they must have gone on together, the murders that they would have committed together, and so much more. They can fill a lot of gaps in Ghost story just through conversations and perspectives. And I know that's what Power Origins is for. It's there for us to understand Ghost and Tommy's journey from when they were teenagers when they met Kanan Stark. I'm sure in Power Origins we're going to learn a lot more about who his mother was, his pops, and other relatives, family, and friends that he had. Family and friends that had a lot of influence on him. Just like Kanan had friends like D-Wiz, Famous, Ronnie, mentors like Snaps and Pop, uncles like Marvin and Lou, a cousin sister in Jukebox. I'm pretty sure they're going to give Ghost a backstory and some more family and friends to make his family tree make sense. Because that's another thing. In Power, we never heard about who Ghost's family was apart from right until the very end in the conversation with Uncle Gabe.
I got to know that you understand that I tried to tell him not to talk to the police. That those kids were bad news.
So that's the gap that Power Origins will no doubt fill. But hearing these stories from the older version of Tommy in Power Legacy, hearing Tommy telling Tariq, this is who Ghost really was. This is what Ghost did back in the day, just like he once told Sean.
Back in the day, Ghost and I drove a 91 Honda Accord.
You shared a car?
Hearing stuff like this from Tommy with Tariq will bring a very different perspective to what we see on screen in Power Origins. And in Power Origins, we're going to get a completely different outlook. The younger Ghost that we get introduced to won't be the same as the older one. We'll slowly get introduced to the family tree that I mentioned of family and friends. There's definitely going to be some similar characteristics like him with his head in his books, but also running around in the streets, which in essence foreshadows his double life that we saw a bit later on with Club Truth and the Streets in Power. We're definitely going to see a lot of similar traits, but I have no doubt he may probably end up being annoying like Tariq was back in Power, or like Kanan is in Raising Kanan. He's not going to be the same smooth, calculated, Tom Ford suit wearing chess player that we knew from Power, and I do think that's what a lot of people want to see. They want to see Omari Hardwick back. They want to see him back in the Tom Ford suits doing his thing. And besides hearing about his stories from other people like Tommy, besides learning about his story in Power Origins, can they make this happen in a show which would, in essence, take place before the opening night of Club Truth, if we're going by what Omari Hardwick mentioned? So let's take a look at the quote from Omari Hardwick once again.
I would love to cut my teeth on the pre-world that Ghost came from.
So we've been through the perspective bit with Tasha, Tommy, and a bit of Kanan's perspective. But what Omari Hardwick would love to do is sink his teeth into the world that they never really got to show, which is the pre-world that Ghost came from, before he opened Club Truth. And I know Courtney Kemp has previously spoken about doing a Power movie before. She was on Instagram Live one time and she mentioned that she thought about doing a Power movie, which would be set before the opening of Club Truth, something that Ghost and Tommy went through before Power Season 1, Episode 1. And I honestly wonder if it is something that they can actually revisit, if Omari Hardwick is still open to the idea of playing Ghost prior to the timeline of Power. Because just like I mentioned at the beginning, I do think he is dead. I don't think he's ever coming back as an alive character. Now I think this kind of spin-off idea or a potential Power movie, or a trilogy movies with potentially Omari Hardwick returning, because he definitely is open to the idea from what he said before. I do think it all depends on when they end Power Origins. For example, do they end with Breeze's death? Do they end with Kanan going to prison being set by Ghost and Tasha? Until we get to around the middle to the end of Power Origins, we won't be able to say, okay, this is where they're going to end Power Origins. So until we don't know how they intend to end Power Origins, we can't say what they can give us prior to the opening of Club Truth. As soon as they finish Power Origins, then we'll know what kind of gap they have to play with between the end of Origins and the beginning of Power. And that's what they can really work with. And I'm sure Sacha Penn would have already thought about that. I know it really is early days in writing Power Origins, but I'm sure he's got the bigger picture in mind, as we normally do when we set our goals and visions. Just like Courtney Kemp said, she always had the idea of Ghost not surviving come the end. But the gap between Origins and OG Power, it definitely is something to keep in mind for how they tease Power Never Ends. There's things like the Trenton beef that Ghost spoke about before.
Shit, I ain't getting a message like this since.
The Trenton beef. Well, you guided me right there, man, and I need you here now.
So what you need?
Ironically, they also made a nod to some of the guys in Trenton in Raising Kanan with Akbar's introduction. There are so many different ways they can go about it, from a one-off Power movie to a trilogy of movies, or even a one-off limited series where they just do maybe just 6 episodes. What I would say is, if Omari Hardwick is down to do a show prior to his life from Power Season 1, Episode 1, that's something I think would be really interesting, because it goes all the way back to the point of us not really knowing the character. Again, Power Origins will definitely do a pretty good job in filling a lot of gaps, but just like I mentioned, where do they finish Power Origins? And what's the gap between the end of Origins to the beginning of Power? And that's something I think the writers can have some real fun with, and also give us as the audience something really special. I've always said Power started with Ghost and it should kind of end with Ghost, even though I think Power will actually never end. They'll always branch off into something new. But tapping into a story prior to Ghost opening Club Truth, after how we know they end Power Origins, that definitely is one way to bring Omari Hardwick back, because like he said, he's definitely open to the idea. I mean, I've always loved the idea of learning more about Felipe Lobos. They were 8 months into their business relationship when we first started Power, and Felipe Lobos even mentioned a couple of crews that Ghost got ahead of.
You told me that the Kings, the Bloods, the DDP, that none of them were worth my time. I believe the exact words were, they're gangs, and we're business.
So there definitely is a lot of fun things they can do when it comes to Power and integrating Omari Hardwick back into the world, which he definitely is open to, if it's the pre-world of Power. So just some food for thought on something I'm sure the higher-ups as stars have no doubt thought about. No doubt they've sat down and mapped out a timeline and thought about a bunch of ideas. In my opinion, I think it all depends on when they do end Power Origins. How do they end that show, and what kind of gap is left between the end of Power Origins to the timeline of the beginning of Power? So, in reality, we may be waiting a while, but honestly, it really may be worth the wait if they can make it happen. Because as they always mention, Power never ends. And I do think a movie or two or a trilogy with Omari Hardwick's return really would be something quite different and quite special. But let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. They've mentioned more spin-offs, they've said Power never ends. So let me know what you think they've got planned beyond Power Origins and Power Legacy. Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.